Welcome back. In this module, we're going to look at the very general topic of how in this course we're going to look at artwork and other cultural artifacts. There are a number of factors we'll consider in this course, and there is a reading in the module which you want to be sure and read. It's actually the introductory chapter of a previous edition of the textbook. What do we need to look at? Again, this is not a course in art history or techniques of art, but we'll be looking at a lot of artwork, including architecture. We need to focus primarily on the historical and social context. We have to understand the time frame in which the object was created. And this will obviously include looking at the impact of the geography on the culture. We'll see this particularly when we start looking at ancient Egypt and Greece and compare the two. The question to ask ourselves as we analyze the art is, what human traits, if any, are universal? And which ones perhaps aren't, are no longer relevant today, what people thought was important before, or perhaps were only relevant for one particular culture. And a very important question is, how do beliefs influence actions? The actions of people throughout history, in my view, are strongly influenced by their underlying beliefs and values. Now again, in this course in the humanity, we're not going to be focusing too much on the, quote, technical aspects of art. But you do need to understand the language. You need to understand the basic elements of art analysis. I know many of you have taken or are taking this same semester a course in Introduction to Art or Art History, or perhaps you've taken an advanced placement AP course in art history in high school. Those courses tend to focus much more than we do on what I call the technical aspects of art, on the medium perspective. We'll be doing that in this course. And you will find in the module quite a few very short videos and articles from the Khan Academy's review of advanced placement art history. I encourage you to go through them. It shouldn't take more than about 2 hours, 2.5 hours to go through all the videos. And when I say short, I mean short. They're 2 to 3 minutes long, most of them, and the articles are 1 to 2 pages. And you don't have to know every term in those articles, but it will help familiarize yourself with art analysis. Now, if you've already taken AP Art History, you probably don't need to go through all that material, but I encourage you to go through it. For our purposes, we want to really go back into an imaginary time machine, and you will hear me repeatedly in this course talk about let's go back in our time machines. So let's think that we're actually living, or imagine that we're living at the time when a piece of literature was written, a song was written, art or architecture was produced, and try to the best of our ability to visualize and think, how would a person at the time to react? When we go into a museum now and we see a painting on the wall, well, a painting before the advent of electric lights was seen either with the natural light coming through a small window or with candlelight during the time of this course. And the art was not produced, obviously, to be shown in museums. Much of the art we will see when we look at Western Europe will have been meant to be placed in a church. So we have to imagine there we're in a religious setting. Obviously, when we look at ancient Egypt, we're not looking at Christian churches, but we're looking at art that was produced to be put perhaps in the tomb of a pharaoh or In Greece, we'll see art produced to be put in temples, etc., etc. So let's go back in our time machines to the best we can. And how would someone at the time feel the impact of art is really, really important. For whom was the art created? Was it created for the noble class in whatever society we're looking at? Or was it created for the common person to look at? A good example on the next slide will be, this is Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at, in the Middle Ages, the cathedrals that were built largely in the Gothic cathedrals in what's now France. And I'm sure you've all seen photos of Notre Dame in Paris. And again, we'll spend 20 or 30 minutes talking about this later in the course. But could you imagine the vast, vast majority of the people, 90, 95%, lived in small one-room huts out in the countryside. They had no windows. They had a small door. They would come to Paris and they would see this. And then they would walk in and see the beautiful stained glass windows. They would probably think that they literally had arrived in heaven. And of course, we'll see when we study this, one of the purposes was so the people did feel that they were approaching heaven. Well, it's not actually heaven. This is an example of stained glass windows. This is across the street from Notre Dame in Paris, Sainte-Chapelle, and as we'll talk about later, common people wouldn't walk into this. This was the king's private chapel, but look at that stained glass. Here we have from Notre Dame some stained glass, and this, again, as we will study later, was designed to teach the Bible to the majority of the people who could not read or write. So the people would be brought into the church and someone would explain this, the Bible, through the biblical scenes shown in this stained glass. Now the people would be taken in awe, and some of you may have been to France and seen this stained glass. It's absolutely amazing on a sunny day. And here we have a scene from the Bible. So it was a graphical representation of the Bible used for teaching purposes. Other art was not well received at the time. And we're not going to cover it in this course because this course ends around 1600. But the French Impressionists in the 19th century, Vincent van Gogh, others, were generally not well received at the time. People thought that their art was too basic, too bohemian, and many of them led very poor lives. But of course today, a famous painting by one of the French Impressionists sells for easily $100 or $200 million. So now again, as you go through this module, the first thing I'd like you to do is read an article entitled The Arts and Introduction. This was the introductory chapter of the previous edition of your textbook. So I posted a PDF of it. And according to this article, and many people would accept the definition of what is art. We don't have to get too hung up on that, but art is essentially, I think, a good way to look at it. It's a human being trying to express ideas or emotions in a form for others to see. And this article will discuss the various forms of art, what was the function, the importance of the historical context, which I mentioned. The setting was the artwork created for the home of a wealthy person, for a church, but it was never, ever produced to be put in a museum at the time. We'll look a lot at the intellectual, emotional, historical context as we go back in our time machines. And again, there are many, many short videos and articles on art analysis and art history in this module. I encourage you to go through all of them. and participate in the discussion at the end of the module. And then the next class will be jumping into the actual historical study of the humanities, and we're starting off with prehistory. Thank you very much.